Welcome to the Power Play Show. I'm going to be looking at some games from the Qatar Masters, which is still going on actually. We're coming to the end of the tournament, and this tournament has attracted some of the strongest players in the world, including Carlsen, Nakamura, and so on, and a host of Indian kids as well. So some really exciting chess being played. So I'm going to be looking at a game of Magnus Carlsen's and, well, a few other, some nice finishes in a moment as well. Speaking of nice finishes, this is white to play in mate in 2. This is really easy. I'm just going to say it. If you don't get this, sorry. time to take up drafts. White to play and mate in 2. Yeah, so we're going to be looking at a remarkable game of Carlsen's, where he plays a slightly unusual line in the Spanish for white, and it's something that might be worth exploring because it occurs not at move 28 or something, but actually very early on, and yeah, not a system that's not to be underestimated, worth trying. It's in fact an old favourite of Spassky's, and I'm going to be looking at a game of Spassky's as well. Right, let's look at this one. Well, maybe my words to take up another game might be a bit harsh, but I don't know. I do a lot of these mate in 2 puzzles, and this one is one of the easier ones. There are a few pieces on the board. These pawns can't move, so I mean black's movements are really limited, and of course that makes it much easier to spot a mate in 2. There's only one way to do it, and that is queen here. So the king has 2 legal moves, king a7 and king b5, and apart from that there are 2 pawn moves, pawn takes knight or b5. So let's start with the pawn moves. Why not? This one and that one. Very straightforward. Okay, let's have a look at b5. Okay, knight c4 is checkmate. And if king a7, knight c6, that knight covers b8. Checkmate. And finally, king b5, and now a nice move to cover all these squares, queen c4. There you go. All possibilities played out. Queen c4 is mate. Yeah, I do like this kind of geometry. Very satisfying. Right, let's move on to the Qatar Masters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a couple of quick wins. Let's switch to training mode. That's good. And this is a really nice game actually. Let me get to the right move number. So playing white, Ramesh Babu Vaishali, who plays for the Indian women's team. She's brother of Prag. She's a strong player in her own right, and she played a really nice game with a nice exchange sacrifice. Let's get to the right position. Right, here we go. Bishop c5, queen here. So you can see that these bishops are absolutely beautiful. All white pieces are beautifully placed. The king is very safe on g2. But how do you break through? So it's still, white is still the exchange down, but that bishop is just such a monstrous piece. Absolutely beautiful. This one isn't too difficult. I'm giving you lots of easy ones to start. White play and win. What you got for me? Bishop d6. That's pretty simple. So if queen takes, well, in fact, queen takes was played in the game, which was very kind, and then checkmate. So player of the black pieces, Kim Yu Chan, very generously allowed a nice checkmate. But there really is nothing better. Anyway, Queen d7 would allow bishop takes e5 check. And when that's blocked, say here, that's not too good. Or bishop f6 and you just take, and there you go. So very easy. Winning move, bishop d6, just a nice little deflection that just cracks black's defense. Okay, let's move on. So next one is, oh yeah, this is sweet. I might as well go from the start. It's a b3. Oh, and this is unusual. So white is sacrificing a pawn. Okay, now we've got a fairly regular position where white has a nice lead in development and is certainly better here. Wow, this is a really nice initiative. Yep, let's keep going. It's interesting. So Yakubayev, Nodibek Yakubayev from Uzbekistan, rated 26-16, and he's playing Gaurav, who's I think from India. But rated 2400, so certainly not a bad player. But watch what happens. I mean, black gets taken apart in this game. So this is nice. Nice switch to the D file. There's some sensitive spots there. Yeah, because of the pressure on the D file, this is actually threatened straight away. So f6, and now the rook swings back. Really nice. Notice he didn't take first, because then the rook would be able to interpose here, or challenge. So that's why rook g2 was played. King f7, takes on f6, pawn takes. Now, knight e2 played. So this one might be dancing round to either f5 or h5. Looks really beautiful. Bishop here. Now, your turn to play. What did white play? Now, I don't see anything wrong with this move. I think positionally it looks very nice to come in here to the good old f5 square. But in fact, Yakubayev found something even stronger. Bishop e6. That's a lovely move. If the king steps back to e8, then rook here is going to win. That bishop has no moves, and well, let's play it out here. Here, if knight f8 protecting, then check. Oof, oof. This doesn't look good, does it? I mean, that's off the top of my head. There might even be something better, but I think this is, it's just winning at least a pawn. It's just interesting. White is completely broken through, and look at these pieces on the other side. Terrible. And what about king f8? Well, the king is not going to survive this one. Bishop c1, that's a beautiful move. Black is just getting chopped up here. And in the game, king takes. So why did he give up the bishop? This is a lovely idea. Rook g7, that's great. Preventing the king coming backwards, so the king is forced up the board, and there is now a threat to play knight here and make next move. Let's just show that. So here, knight check and checkmate. So the rook covers here, the bishop covers here, the pawn covers here, and that's that. So in the game, black Found a desperate defence of sorts. It doesn't last very long. So let's see. Black is still a pawn up, but that's a threat again. Bishop here. So that's defending the f4 square. This was played anyway. Knight d4 going the other way. And that was the final move. So if the king goes back, then rook takes bishop. And if the king comes forward, we can give a check. And then rook d3. There we are. That's very nice. So let's just recap. I mean, the key move is bishop e6. I mean, this is a great position for white for so many reasons, but bishop e6 is just an absolute killer, forcing a breakthrough basically. King takes rook g7, and too much for black to bear. Good stuff. Okay, I think that's time to move on. Yeah, I want to show you this game from Carlsen, because this is a really, I think it's a really interesting opening. So Carlsen has been struggling a little bit in the tournament. He had a terrible loss in, I think it was round 2, where his standard of play was just so much worse than I've ever seen him play, actually. I don't think I've ever seen Magnus collapse so badly in a game. It was a bit like his round 1 game, except this time Carlsen was on the other end of the boot. It's curious, very curious. I mean, he did explain that he was kind of upset by the conditions in the tournament hall, and his opponent was wearing a watch, and was that against the rules, and He did congratulate his opponent, has to be said. But he was clearly not himself in that game. So he's been struggling a little bit to fight back. But this is round 7, and he's fought his way back to near the top. So what's going on here? A6. It's a Spanish. Knight here. And this is where Carlsen plays something a little bit unusual. Now, in recent years, we've, apart from the main line, of course, which is still the main line, D3 has become quite a common move as well. But yeah, we've also seen things like castles, bishop e7, and now instead of rook e1, d3 in that position as well. But here, Carlsen played knight c3, which looks like one of those beginner's moves where you just kind of put these knights on their best squares, supposedly, and you don't realise that sometimes c3 and d4 is a plan here. So it's a very unpretentious system. It's a 4 knights basically. But it's not so bad. It's not so bad. It's not to be underestimated. b5. So that looks like the normal move. Bishop b3 and bishop c5. After this game, I'd very much like to show you a game played by Spassky where his opponent played bishop e7. It's a beautiful game. Spassky in the late 80s, when he was playing in these, he was invited to these top tournaments and somehow made a lot of draws, but he still played some beautiful chess actually in some games. And he used that system very well. So this is not to be underestimated. But Karthikeyan from India, very decent player. He's already won the Indian Championship a couple of times a few years ago. He hasn't made the progress of Prag or Gukesh or Erigaisi and others. He hasn't hit 2700. You can see his rating's 2611 here. But a very decent player. Bishop c5. Carlsen played knight d5. So that looks very premature to move the knight again. It's rather similar to these archangel variations where black plays an early b5 and bishop b7, or an early bishop c5 anyway. It does look a bit funny to play the knight there, particularly considering that that pawn on e4 can be taken. So for example here, what's wrong with this? Is this just a good move for black, considering that f2 is attacked? In fact, white has an excellent move here, and I'm sure Carlsen understood this very well. He played d4. Sorry, this is not the game. You can play d4. And for example, if knight takes, you take here, and then queen g4, attacking these two. You know, that's the whole issue with this one. And pawn takes pawn is kind of interesting, because you have to watch out with your king here. You know, queen e2, I guess, could be met by castles. Okay, all these tactics are so typical of the Spanish. You know, that's obviously a problem for white, but you can actually castle here. And this gives white a huge initiative, so black needs to castle. The great thing is that that knight stops the pawn coming to d5, and then you play rook e1. And that's a bit problematic for black. So if the knight goes back here, you can see there's a pin. Going to be able to damage the pawns. If the knight goes back the other way, bishop g5 traps the queen. And that allows some humongous discovered attack here. I guess you could take a rook. I suspect there's something even better. It looks like black's king is in dire trouble here. So here, yeah, that's better. And that traps the queen. Yeah. So it's interesting. Knight takes d4 is really tricky. I mean, there are better defenses, but still, you know, tremendous initiative from white. So Carlsen played something very sensible. He simply played d6. Now white needs to have this bishop coming to g5 straight away, but I'm afraid not possible. I mean, one can just play d3 here with the idea bishop g5, and white has a slight initiative here. So for example, if knight takes here, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah, this is interesting. So d3 is possible, but Carlsen played c3. He's striving for more. He wants to play the pawn to d4, of course, in typical Spanish fashion. Yeah, what about knight takes e4? That's again the big question. In fact, once again, white has a very nice initiative here. Queen here. Curiously enough, queen there is the best move. If the knight goes back, then I suspect there's problems after bishop g5. And after this, a4. So with f5, you can see black can't castle, and so white just has a really nice initiative. Okay, back we go. So Carlsen played bishop e6 and d4, launching the pawn in the middle. So again, black has to be rather careful here. If this bishop retreats, then bishop g5, that looks like a really nice pin. You can see black is under pressure. Black has to find some good moves here. This is necessary. Okay, so what's the story? Why is black playing like this? Two pieces attacked. You can get away with it because you can throw in a check. I like Carlsen's next move now. If you play bishop d2, that exchange of bishops just takes the edge from white's position. Without a dot squared bishop, then, you know, black is very secure here. This bishop doesn't look great. Black threatens to take here. I don't see where white's initiative is coming from. So what did white play? Carlsen played king f1. You can get away with this. I mean, one thing is, because there's no light squared bishop, so actually on a light square the king is relatively secure. This one is a good piece, so we'll bear that one in mind. And actually white has a decent initiative here. In fact, this has even been played before. And I suspect Carlsen knew that, but he wasn't very well prepared. Looking at his demeanour in this tournament, he looks like he's a bit unkempt. He looks like he's having a bad hair day or a bad tournament day. And I mean, he said often, you know, one of the interviews that he's not really preparing. You know, one of the games he turned up and, you know, he had to check the name card by the side of the board to actually see who he was playing. So his preparation not in depth. And I'm sure he realised, you know, this is a playable line from, you know, perhaps work he'd done a long time ago, but he didn't find the right move here. So what's white's the correct move? Well, bishop g5 looks very reasonable to bring the bishop into play. Of course, that would lose a piece. So knight g6. This has been played before. In this game, white actually played queen e2, put the king on f8. White is doing okay here. But my machine prefers a3. So this is a slight problem. This bishop is not a good piece. You know, it's just looking at this pawn, it's shut out of play. And in the meantime, well, that's actually a really nice move because it weakens this one. And obviously there are issues on the a file. Castles, and this is a case of out of the frying pan into the fire because h4 comes. And now you can see actually the king is ideally situated on f1. You don't need to clear the back rank to connect the rooks, because this rook is usefully employed on a1 and this rook is usefully employed on h1. This is quite a common idea. So of course you want to steam the pawn all the way down to h6. That would be very uncomfortable. But if h6, what do you play? What's white's move? Nice move. h5, of course. Now where can that knight go? I mean, it doesn't want to go back here because pawns will be damaged. It doesn't want to go here, certainly. And if pawn takes bishop, this is horrendo. Look at that open h file. Can you imagine this one? Woof, not good. And if h5, okay, what's white's next move? What is white going to do next? Well, you could just pop that bishop back to c2. So that's pointing in the right direction. both knights under fire actually. It's very hard for black to do anything here. I mean, who knows? G4 might be coming. I mean, there are lots of ways that white can try and break in here. Who knows? Maybe a rook h3 to g3 as well. Maybe this one swings over in some shape or form. It looks like a lovely position for white. So simple developing move actually. Bishop g5 is very good. Queen d3 played. Queen d7, and now it's not so clear. This is a good move. I suspect that Carlsen underestimated Queen d7, because the point is that black now has the option to go queenside, depending on how white plays. But even just Queen d7, you know, the queen coming here, looks quite good. h4. So Carlsen wants to bring the rook into the game. Understandable. h5, gain some space. You never know, you might be able to use that. Knight takes pawn on d5. Yeah, this is the problem. With that bishop coming to g5, then black couldn't take on d5. Here it's very different. So black has won a pawn, and actually that's quite stable. I know it sort of brings that bishop into play, but how do you actually bring more pressure to bear on that knight? It's really difficult. At the moment, yes, it's nice to swing this rook up, but look, all those squares are covered by black's knights. So the rook doesn't come into play very easily. In fact, my computer wants black to play castles here, which, you know, one could say is quite a brave move from a human point of view. Considering that there are things like this, and there's an open diagonal, and potentially g4. Actually, none of these really achieve much. Black is counter-attacking very nicely. So g5, you steam on. But we have castles queenside instead, which is also quite nice for black. I mean, I can understand why this one was played, because actually the king is pretty secure with this bishop here. And yeah, there's a problem. I mean, if you could perhaps bring that king's rook somewhere over here. Yes, I realise there's this one, but you know what I mean. If somehow these rooks could connect, but actually it's a problem. White is only attacking with one rook here. You can't really do much. So it's a curious position. So Carlsen is trying to stir things up with knight d2, but he's struggling here. You know, he's trying to equalise. And okay, what does black play after this move? Knight e4. You could go knight b4 here, but king b7. Very calm move. So Carlsen is trying to stir things up, but queen c6. And this is where Carlsen is clearly very ambitious. He wants to put pressure on his opponent. But he played this move, bishop h6. He was playing very quickly. Right, black to play. What would you do here? Black to play. It's complicated, but this is pushing it too far. Rook takes e4 played. And black has two minor pieces against a rook. But what you need when you're playing with minor pieces against rooks, the minor pieces need stable squares, and these are pretty stable. You know, the knight on d5 is well protected. This is an issue. The king is pretty safe actually on the queen side. I mean, you can see it's packed with pieces. King back, that's important to make room for the queen, so that if it's hit then it can simply step back, and actually there's no danger, absolutely no danger to the king. Too many pieces around the king. Well, Carlsen is still trying to stir things up. He's managed to get one pawn for his trouble, but black is so solid. In many ways I can imagine that Carlsen was pleased to see the exchange of bishop for knight, because it just kind of simplifies his task. And Carlsen exchanged. Well, it's a problem. If you bring the queen back, then you can just start cashing in here. Okay, so this one, and that needed protecting. Black's technique was excellent, although there's a nominal material parity with rook and pawn against bishop and knight. In fact, black is fine here. So if rook takes pawn, then knight e3 check. Rook here. Black has a really nice position. There you go, little weakness there. And that's a good move, because the knight is going to come around here to attack this one, and you want to play d5 as well to fix that pawn. And yeah, with these moves you can see black is really taking control. That's not how things went. I mean, this is just good for black, basically. Carlsen played d5. He's still, do you notice he's still, you know, every turn he's trying to stir things up. I mean, I'll just go to the end, because black is obviously winning this position. This is en prise. So here, that's a good move. Attacking this one. I'll just go to the end. This is really nicely played. So black is now breaking through. That's why he doesn't mind giving this one up. And what's the next move? Knight there. This attack is too strong. And final move, bishop e3. End of game. There isn't much that white can do here. For example, check, that one's attacked. And then knight d3 threatens that one. Devastating. Again, a really bad loss by Carlsen. Let's just look at some key moves here. You know, he's just not on his game. However, the opening is really interesting, and I think this is very much worth exploring. So here, this move knight d5, putting some pressure on black straight away. Incidentally, quite a famous game, Alekin Reti went knight e5, d4, went like this. You'll find it in Alekin's best games, 1908 to 1923, which was very sharp, and finally ended in a draw. But knight d5, that's the way to go, according to the engines, and puts black under pressure. And Carlsen could have got a good position if he'd played like this, bishop g5. On another day of the week, Carlsen would have won this game in under 30 moves, I would say. And we're only at move 13. I think black is under massive pressure in this position. So something's not right in the land of Magnus. He's lacking a bit of oomph. Well, I want to show you this game of CHESSBASE that I mentioned. So this is against John van der Veel, played in the European Cup final. Solingen against Rotterdam. Yeah, CHESSBASE played for Solingen. So Solingen is a club in Germany, not too far from Cologne. So let's have a look at this one, because it's a really nice game. So here we go. Once again, this move knight c3. So it's very similar to 4 knights here and bishop b5, except we have the inclusion of a6 and bishop a4. So that's a curious feature. Knight c3 here. And this one played, bishop b3. I would say that most players are going to go b5 here, just to eliminate this possibility of bishop takes c6. Why not? But the bishop does come to its nice diagonal. And instead of bishop c5 that we saw in the Carlsen game, bishop e7. So it looks very normal. I mean, with the bishop on e7, then there aren't going to be any problems with the bishop pinning from g5, and that was an issue in the Carlsen Carthagean game. So this is Carthagean game. So how does white play? d3. So it's very unpretentious. d6. And knight a5 from CHESSBASE. So if that's taken, well, you know, white is a little bit better here, no doubt about it. That's a strong piece, and you know, you can think about these moves. White is a little bit better. But instead of that, black played knight a5. So that looks reasonable, because black is going to be able to snap off that important light squared bishop. In fact, that's a slight problem. But let's see how CHESSBASE dealt with it. So he's taking a bishop as well. He doesn't want to be left out. I mean, if white plays like this, and let's say, I don't know, castles, black is slightly better here, in my opinion. 2 bishops. It's as simple as that. 2 bishops against bishop and knight. That's why knight takes bishop played, and castles, and c5. Fair enough. I mean, at some moment, black is going to have to take that bishop, particularly after that one. But if he goes back, then bishop pair. So it's very important that that is taken. And castles. Now, what's going on in this position? It's almost a symmetrical pawn structure, certainly from this rank to the right. Pawns are symmetrical. Slight difference on the queen side. These pieces about the same. You know, opposite colour bishops. What is going on here? You know, white. How can white even think about claiming advantage in this position? It seems curious. I really like CHESSBASE's next move. This is absolute class. He played Queen e2. I once saw him analysing a game, a post-mortem, in a tournament in London. and in some position in the French as white, he played Queen E2, and he said, good move, solid, good move, good move. Nobody knows why, but good move. And I can just hear him saying that with this move Queen E2. It's really not clear what he's going to do next, but it simply connects the rooks. And he's just keeping a little eye on what black is up to. Now this position is close to equal, but white is very slightly better because this rook is on a semi-open file. It's got one more move with that bishop, but it's pretty close to equal. Alright, so black to play. Have a think how you'd play with black here. I find this really intriguing because after black's next move, Spassky was able to develop an initiative incredibly. So black to play. Van der Wiel played bishop b7. We'll come on to that in a second. That's an interesting move, suggested by my computer. So what's that about? Well, it potentially allows the f-pawn to advance. Okay, let's play, for example, h3. Okay, that's a nothing move. I just want to show you what happens. Knight b8. Aha! This is good. So it's spinning into c6. And looking at that d4 square. And black is fine in this position because, you know, white certainly doesn't want to play c3 here. That looks really ugly because that would weaken the pawn. You know, there could be a chain reaction here, something like this. Ugh. Now these look dreadful, and there's a square here, and no, not good. So what a clever idea. Knight d7 and then knight b8. Now, I'm not saying that white's moves h3 and knight h2 are the best, but I really like the idea. But Van der Wiel played knight b7. Nope, I've written there. Okay, so why is bishop b7 inaccurate? It looks very reasonable considering that this pawn is going to need protection. Perhaps this frees the rook for action somewhere. So why is bishop b7 not so great? Knight h4, of course. Knight h4. It's just coming in on the outpost. And in fact, I think black's best move here is to put the bishop back to c8. But it's tough to make a move like that. To just go back. Then maybe f4. I mean, yeah, white's a bit better. But instead, it went d5. The knight came in. And Spassky simply played f3. Just rock solid. And it means that it's very hard to get rid of that knight. Because if g6, that weakens those squares around the king. Very cool idea just to sit there solidly. In fact, my computer likes the brazen move f4. And there are some lovely variations. For example, here, and the combination of bishop and knight on the king's side are just too much. There are some beautiful lines. And what else? Yeah, I mean, it's hard for black to do anything here, actually, curiously. But f3 is really interesting. Let's see how Spassky dealt with this. So king h8, yeah, clearly he's worried about this knight having options. c4, and now Spassky takes the initiative. I mean, black should close things with d4, but I can understand why he didn't want to do that. You know, maybe here, this swings over. Queen coming out here, maybe g4, maybe f4. Once the pressure is off this pawn, then you can go for f4. So it's certainly pleasant for white. But this one was played. Now it gets even worse. That's not a good square for the knight. Look at these weak points in the position. I'm afraid there really isn't time to play this move. I can imagine bishop e3 might well be very, very strong. Let's just see how the game finished. g6. The knight spun back. Watch the king now. This is not good. This is not good. Spassky played brilliantly. f5. It's an ugly move, but black's position is really not good here. And it's not just an extra pawn, but black's position is falling apart. This is just, all these pieces, they're just way too weak. And that's a fantastic move. So if that's taken, then you can just crash it, basically. That's another good move. So this endgame, look, that's desperate, absolutely desperate. And also this rook coming down to d6. Once the rook goes to d6, you can see that really inconveniences both pieces. And that was played. And that was played. I mean, this is absolute demolition. If the king moves, then let me see. I imagine queen g5 check. Yeah, this looks quite good. So that was taken, and yeah, Van der Velde gave up at this point. What a game. I absolutely love that. Sometimes Spassky just wins these games in such an effortless way. Queen e2, that's the star move for me. It's just so interesting how everything worked perfectly after that. It's like he's waiting for his opponent to play something inaccurate. But I think knight d7 is really interesting, as the computer suggests, putting the knight on c6. Right, I'm going to leave things there, but certainly this is a system. If you're looking for another system to play with a Spanish, not so silly. Knight c3. Right, let me leave you with another game from the Qatar Masters. Let me get to the right point in the game.